In this video, we will be examining Latin sentences containing relative clauses and learning the best ways or methods for translating those types of sentences. First of all, make sure to preview the vocabulary and read the sentence in its entirety, noticing as you read each word things that you might recognize about it, like what it means, the endings that it has on it and what case they might be. If you're looking at a prepositional phrase, notice where the prepositional phrase ends. If you're looking at a verb, pay attention to what its subject and tense is. Let's read this sentence together. Milites qui in magno bello pugnaverant vidi. The first thing I notice are the two verbs pugnaverant and vidi. Pugnaverant is translated as they had fought. My subject is plural because of the NT. I can also use a noun, a plural noun, as the subject. Vidi is another verb that has as its subject I saw. I notice that I have a prepositional phrase in magno bello. Now, let's begin to see if we can find the relative clause where it begins and ends and what it is connected to. In this sentence, notice that the relative clause begins with the relative pronoun qui and ends with the first verb, they had fought. Now let's examine qui and find its antecedent. Milites is masculine, plural, and qui is also masculine and plural. This is how I know that qui has milites as its antecedent. Qui is always in the nominative form, and that means that it is the subject of the verb pugnaverant. Notice that pugnaverant has nt on the end, making the subject plural. Another reinforcing fact for qui being the subject. Remember that when we translate this sentence, we will begin by finding the subject of the main idea, which is on the verb vidi, I. This alerts me to the fact that I need a direct object. Milites can be in the accusative plural, and that makes it the direct object. So we translate, I saw the soldiers who had fought in the Great War. Remember that you must always place the relative clause immediately after its antecedent, soldiers, in this sentence, in your English translation. Now we are ready to look at a new sentence. Remember that the first thing you want to do is read the sentence in its entirety and preview the vocabulary, looking for any forms of the relative pronoun, things about the verb, prepositional phrases. Gravia erant tela quae portabamus. I notice that my verb, portabamus, is we were carrying, and that I also have the verb erant, which means they were, or it could also be there were, or I could also look for a plural subject and simply translate erant as were. You should also notice that gravia is an adjective and must describe a noun that has the same gender, number, and case. Now let's focus on the relative clause, which always begins with the relative pronoun and ends with the first verb following it. Remember that the antecedent of the relative pronoun must have the same gender and number as the relative pronoun. Quae is in the feminine nominative singular form, or the neuter nominative and accusative plural form. This means I must look for an antecedent that is either feminine singular or neuter and plural. I must look outside of the relative clause for a noun that fits one of these criteria. Talum, tali, weapon, is a second declension neuter noun and the only noun in the part of the sentence that is not in the relative clause. Therefore, it must be the antecedent of my relative pronoun because they are both neuter and plural. Now let's examine the main part of the sentence. The verb errant is a being verb. Being verbs require subjects and predicate nouns, but not direct objects. So tela is likely in the nominative case. Quae cannot be in the accusative in the nominative case because the ending on the verb bamus is we. This means that quae will have to be accusative, even though tela, its antecedent, is in the nominative case. Now we are ready to put together the entire sentence. The weapons which we were carrying were heavy. Remember that we have to use the which we were carrying immediately after the word weapons. Now let's examine the sentence ubi sunt puellae feminaeque quibuscum ambulabas. Remember to look for familiar words and especially examine the verbs. In this sentence I see sunt, they are or there are, and also the verb ambulabas, which means you were walking. Notice also that the form of the relative pronoun quibus is prefixed to the preposition cum, and so we will translate that word as with whom. Now let's begin to look for the relative clause, which begins with quibus and ends with the first verb after it, ambulabas. As I mentioned, recall that quibus is the ablative plural form. It's also dative plural, but because of the cum, that's what makes it ablative. Quibus occurs in all three genders, but because it is ablative and plural, I must look for an antecedent that is also ablative and plural. And recall that the verb has as its subject you. If I look at nouns outside of the relative clause, I should notice that puellae and feminae are both feminine and plural. Recall that que as a suffix on a noun is the word and joins together the two words, the one that is attached to with the one that comes before it. When we translate this sentence, we will say, where are the girls and women with whom you were walking? If you feel comfortable with these types of sentences, please continue by working on the practice sentences I have prepared for you. If you would like more instruction, listen to video B.